The scent of fermenting grapes hung heavy in the twilight air, and that's where Vladric found her curled among the ancient vines of his estate, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to tear the very fabric of the evening silence. He had ruled for 7 centuries, commanded legions of the undying, brought kingdoms to their knees with nothing more than a whispered threat, and yet the sight of this weeping girl in his vineyard stopped him cold. Her dark hair spilled across the earth like ink. Her hands clutched at the soil as though trying to anchor herself to something solid in a world that had clearly failed her. Vladric stood there for a long moment, his pale fingers curling at his sides, watching her with eyes that had seen empires rise and crumble but had forgotten what it meant to witness raw, unfiltered human grief. Then, instead of commanding her removal or demanding explanations as any king might do, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He lowered himself to the ground beside her, his fine dark coat settling into the dirt between the gnarled roots, and simply sat, the girl startled, her head jerking up to reveal a face streaked with tears and dirt. Her eyes were an impossible shade of green, bright even in the fading light, and they widened with recognition and terror when she took in his appearance. His white hair fell past his shoulders, pristine despite the evening breeze. His skin was marble pale, ageless and cold. The regal bearing he carried, even while sitting in the dirt, marked him as something far beyond human. "I'm sorry," she gasped, scrambling backward through the vines. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to trespass, I couldn't." "Be still," Vladric said, and though his voice was quiet, it carried the weight of absolute authority. She froze mid-crawl, trembling. He regarded her with ancient eyes that held neither warmth nor cruelty, merely curiosity. "You're on my land, I know," her voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry, I'll leave. I just needed somewhere that felt—" She broke off, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Somewhere that felt what?" "Somewhere that felt like it understood endings." The words came out in a whisper, broken and raw. Vladric tilted his head, studying her. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, dressed in jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Human thoroughly and completely, with a heartbeat he could hear from where he sat, rapid and erratic with fear and grief. "And my vineyard understands endings? Everything here is dying," she said, gesturing weakly at the vines around them. "The grapes, the leaves, all of it. Dying to become something else. Wine, rot, compost." It felt appropriate. He was silent for a long moment, processing this strange poetry from a trespasser who should have been begging for her life but instead spoke of transformation and death. "What are you running from?" "Everything." She laughed, and it was a terrible sound, hollow and sharp. "My father died 3 weeks ago. Cancer. My mother left when I was 12. I lost my job yesterday because I took too many days off for his funeral and settling his affairs. The landlord sold the building I was renting, so I have to be out in 2 weeks. I have no siblings, no family, no money, and apparently no ability to cope like a normal person because I'm sitting in a stranger's vineyard, sobbing into the dirt like a complete lunatic." Vladric said nothing. He had long ago lost the capacity for conventional comfort, what were a few human troubles measured against centuries. But something about her complete unraveling held his attention. She wasn't asking for help, wasn't begging or pleading, she was simply breaking apart, and she'd chosen his land to do it on. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. "Grace, Grace Orwell, Grace." He tested the word, found it oddly fitting. "I am Vladric. I know who you are." She laughed again, that same broken sound. "Everyone in town knows about the vampire king who owns the vineyard on the hill. We're not supposed to come up here. You're supposed to be dangerous. I am dangerous. Then why are you sitting in the dirt with me instead of killing me or throwing me out or whatever it is vampire kings do to trespassers?" It was a fair question, and Vladric didn't have a good answer. By all rights, he should have dealt with her swiftly and returned to the manor. He had correspondence to attend to, politics among the vampire courts that required his attention, treaties to negotiate. Instead, he sat in the cooling earth watching the last light drain from the sky and found himself unwilling to move. "Perhaps because you're not the first creature to seek solace among dying things," he said at last. "Though you are the first in quite some time to do so while still breathing." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw the moment her fear shifted into something else. Not comfort exactly, but a kind of resigned recognition. "Are you going to kill me? Do you want me to?" "No." The answer came quickly, surprising them both. "No, I don't. I'm just tired." So incredibly tired. Vladric rose in one fluid motion, extending his hand to her. "Then come inside. You're covered in dirt. You've been crying for what I suspect has been hours, and the night is getting cold." Grace stared at his outstretched hand as though it might be a trap. "Why would you help me?" "I haven't decided if I am helping you," Vladric replied. "But I find myself disinclined to leave you weeping in my vineyard all night. Consider it a practical concern. Your grief is rather loud." Despite everything, a tiny smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's possibly the worst attempt at kindness I've ever heard. I'm 732 years old. Kindness is not my forte. She took his hand, and the moment her warm fingers touched his cold palm, something shifted in the air between them. Vladric felt it like a physical thing, a tightening in his chest that he couldn't name. Her pulse jumped beneath his fingers, quick and alive, and for a moment he was acutely aware of how fragile she was, how easy it would be to break her, how desperately he didn't want to. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. "When did you last eat?" "I don't remember." She looked down at their still joined hands, then up at his face. "You're really going to help me?" "I'm going to feed you and provide you with a place to clean yourself," Vladric said, releasing her hand with what felt like reluctance. "Beyond that, I make no promises. Come." He turned and began walking toward the manor, not bothering to check if she followed. He heard her footsteps behind him after a moment's hesitation, quick and uncertain on the path through the vines. The Beaumont estate rose before them, a sprawling mansion of dark stone and Gothic architecture that had been his home for the past 2 centuries. Gargoyles perched on the eaves, their stone faces caught in permanent snarls. Stained glass windows glowed with warm light from within. "This is where you live?" Grace breathed, stopping at the base of the grand staircase that led to the main entrance. "For now, I have other residences." Vladric climbed the stairs, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. "I move every few decades to avoid questions about why I don't age." The interior was exactly what one might expect of a vampire's home, opulent and dark, filled with antiques and artwork that spanned centuries. A massive chandelier hung in the entrance hall, crystal and wrought iron that caught the light and scattered it in prismatic patterns across the walls. Portraits of people long dead lined the corridors. The furniture was expensive, Gothic, perfectly maintained. A figure emerged from a side room, tall and pale with hair the color of fresh snow pulled back in a severe bun. Her red eyes, a mark of her age and power, fixed on Grace with immediate suspicion. "My lord, you've brought home a human." "Very observant, Katerina." Vladric shrugged out of his coat, handing it to her without ceremony. "Have Mikhail prepare something to eat, human food, and draw a bath in the blue guest room." Katerina's eyebrows rose almost to her hairline. "You wish us to care for her? I wish you to follow my instructions without questioning them." His voice turned cold, the absolute authority of a king who had not been challenged in his own home for decades. Katerina bowed her head immediately. "Of course, my lord, forgive me." She turned her gaze to Grace, and though her expression remained carefully neutral, there was curiosity there. "This way, miss. We'll have you comfortable shortly." Grace looked at Vladric, uncertainty written across her features. "I don't understand what's happening." "Neither do I," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "But you will eat, bathe, and rest. In the morning, we will determine what comes next." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Grace studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or ulterior motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and followed Katerina up the grand staircase. Vladric watched until she disappeared around the corner, then made his way to his study. The room was his sanctuary, lined floor to ceiling with books collected over centuries. A fire burned in the hearth. Despite the mild evening, he felt no temperature, but he'd always enjoyed the aesthetic. He poured himself a glass of wine from his private collection, a vintage from 1847 that had aged into something extraordinary, and settled into his favorite chair. Mikhail appeared in the doorway, 20 minutes later, his silver hair catching the firelight. He was younger than Vladric by a century, but they'd been friends for most of that time, which gave him liberties others didn't enjoy. "You sat in the dirt with a crying human. Word travels fast." Katerina is beside herself, trying to determine if this is some elaborate political maneuver she doesn't understand. Mikhail came fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "Is it?" "No." "Then what is it?" Vladric swirled the wine in his glass, watching the way it caught the light. "I don't know. You don't know." Mikhail repeated the words slowly, as though tasting them for sense. "You who plans every move 3 decades in advance. You who turned the European vampire courts into a unified coalition through sheer force of will and political brilliance. You don't know why you brought home a starving, grieving human woman. If you have a point, make it. My point is that in the 700 years I've known you, I've never seen you act on impulse. You don't pick up strays. You don't sit in dirt with weeping girls. You don't disrupt your entire evening to offer shelter to trespassers." Mikhail leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "So either you're having some kind of existential crisis, or there's something about this particular human that compelled you to break every pattern you've established." Vladric was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, he said, "She spoke of endings and transformations, of dying to become something else. She sat in my vineyard and wept as though her heart was tearing itself apart. And when I asked if she wanted to die, she said no. She's lost everything, Mikhail. Everything, and yet she chooses to continue. Humans always choose to continue. It's their most annoying quality." "Is it?" Vladric looked up at his friend. We've been immortal so long we've forgotten what it means to lose everything and still wake up the next morning. We've forgotten what real courage looks like. Mikhail's expression softened. You're lonely. I'm a king. I'm surrounded by subjects and supplicants every hour of every night. That's not the same as companionship, and you know it. Before Vladric could respond, Katerina appeared in the doorway. My lord, the girl is bathed and fed. She's asked to speak with you before she retires. Vladric set down his wineglass and rose. Where is she? The blue guest room, as requested. He made his way through the manor's corridors, aware of Mikhail following at a discreet distance. The blue guest room was in the east wing, decorated in soft grays and deep blues, with a four-poster bed and windows that overlooked the vineyard. He knocked once, a courtesy he rarely extended to anyone. Come in, Grace's voice called. She was standing by the window, wrapped in a thick robe that Katerina must have provided. Her hair was damp from the bath, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She'd scrubbed the dirt and tears from her face, revealing features that were striking in their ordinariness, not beautiful in the classical sense, but alive and human and real in a way that made Vladric's chest tighten again. Thank you, she said simply, for the food and the bath and the room. I don't understand why you're doing this, but thank you. You're welcome. Katerina said I could stay the night. Is that true? It is. Grace turned to face him fully, and in her eyes he saw the same searching assessment she'd given him in the vineyard. What happens in the morning? That depends. Vladric moved into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. You said you have 2 weeks before you lose your home. You have no job, no family, no resources. What were you planning to do? I honestly don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. Find another job, I suppose. Hope I can scrape together enough for a deposit on a new place before the 2 weeks are up. Maybe move to a different city where rent is cheaper, and if you can't, then I'll figure something else out. I always do. But her voice wavered, betraying the fear beneath the brave words. Vladric made a decision that he would probably question for years to come. I have a proposition for you. Grace's eyebrows rose. What kind of proposition? My household manager position has been vacant for 3 months. The previous occupant retired to the vampire court in Prague. The position includes room and board in the manor, a generous salary, and relative autonomy in running the day-to-day operations of the estate. You're offering me a job, she said it slowly, as though testing the words for a trap. I am. Why? Because you need one. And I need someone competent to manage a household that currently runs on improvisation and goodwill. It wasn't entirely true. Katerina and Mikhail kept things running smoothly enough, but it also wasn't entirely false. You don't know if I'm competent. You managed your father's end-of-life care while working full-time. You've kept yourself housed and fed despite having no family support. You sought solace in a place of transformation rather than destruction. These things suggest competence to me. Grace laughed, and this time it held a hint of genuine amusement. That's the strangest job interview I've ever had. I've never been conventional. No, I don't suppose vampire kings typically are. She moved away from the window, settling on the edge of the bed. If I say yes, what would I actually be doing? Managing the household staff. There are 5 full-time employees, all vampire, overseeing maintenance and repairs, organizing social events when necessary, handling correspondence and scheduling, ensuring the estate runs smoothly. And the catch is? The catch is that you would be a human living among vampires. You would see things that might frighten you. You would be privy to secrets that could get you killed if you shared them with the wrong people. You would be under my protection, which comes with its own complications. He met her eyes steadily. And you would need to understand that while I am offering you employment, I am also offering you something I don't give lightly, my trust. If you betray that, the consequences would be severe. Grace was quiet for a long time, her gaze never leaving his face. Finally, she said, I don't want to die, but I'm not afraid of you. You should be probably, but I'm not. She stood, walking toward him until only a few feet separated them. You found me at my absolute lowest point, and instead of taking advantage of that, you showed me kindness. Maybe it was practical kindness, maybe it was impulse, maybe it was something else entirely. But you sat in the dirt with me when you could have just walked away. That means something. It means I made an unusual choice in a moment of curiosity. It means you're not as cold as you pretend to be. She smiled, small but genuine. I'll take the job. On one condition, which is, you tell me the real reason you're doing this. Vladric could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he found himself saying, because in 732 years I've never met anyone who sat in a dying vineyard and found poetry in endings. Because your grief was honest in a way I've forgotten how to be. Because when I asked if you wanted to die, you said no. And I realized I wanted to know what kind of person chooses life when they've lost everything. Does that satisfy you? Grace's expression softened. Yes, it does. Then we have an accord. He extended his hand, formal and old-fashioned. Welcome to Beaumont Estate, Grace Orwell. She took his hand, and again that strange tightening in his chest. Thank you, Vladric. Rest tonight. Tomorrow Katerina will begin training you. He released her hand and turned toward the door, then paused. Grace, yes? You're not alone anymore. Remember that. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Mikhail was waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall with an expression that clearly said, I told you so. Not a word, Vladric warned. Wouldn't dream of it. Mikhail pushed off the wall, falling into step beside him. Though I will say, if you wanted companionship, there are less complicated ways to acquire it. This isn't about companionship. Keep telling yourself that. The next morning, or rather the next evening, as vampires kept nocturnal hours, Vladric woke to find his household in controlled chaos. He could hear Katerina's voice drifting up from the ground floor, crisp and efficient, as she explained the intricacies of vampire etiquette to Grace. He dressed in his usual formal attire, black on black with subtle embroidery, and made his way downstairs. Grace stood in the main hall, dressed in clothes that Katerina must have procured for her, taking notes on a tablet while Katerina pointed out various architectural features and their significance. She looked rested, more composed than she had the previous evening, though he could still see shadows beneath her eyes. And this portrait is of Vladric's sire, Lord Aldrich of the Carpathian court, Katerina was saying, gesturing to a stern-faced vampire in Renaissance-era clothing. He was killed in the blood wars of 1523. Vladric avenged his death and claimed the throne. How did he? Grace broke off when she noticed Vladric on the stairs. Good evening. Good evening. He descended the rest of the way, joining them in the hall. I trust Katerina is providing adequate instruction? She's been wonderful, Grace said, and the genuine warmth in her voice made Katerina's stern expression soften slightly. Though I think my head might explode from all the information. Did you really kill 15 vampires to avenge your sire? 17, actually. Histories tend to undercount. He turned to Katerina. Has she eaten? Human food is prepared in the kitchen. I wasn't sure what she preferred. I can get it myself, Grace interjected. You don't need to wait on me. You are a member of this household now, Vladric said. We take care of our own. Katerina, please ensure she eats properly. Grace, after you've finished, meet me in my study. There are contracts to sign and details to discuss. He left them to it, making his way to the study where the morning's evening's correspondence waited. Letters from the Prague court, requests for audience from lesser vampires seeking favor, an invitation to a gathering in Vienna next month. The endless bureaucracy of immortal politics. Grace appeared 40 minutes later, knocking politely before entering. You wanted to see me? Sit. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, pushing a stack of papers toward her. Standard employment contract. Read it carefully before you sign. She settled into the chair and began reading, her brow furrowing in concentration. Vladric watched her, noting the way she chewed her bottom lip when she encountered a confusing clause, the way her fingers traced the words as though committing them to memory. This is a very generous salary, she said after a few minutes. It's appropriate for the position. It's 3 times what I was making at my last job. Your last job didn't require you to manage a vampire household or keep secrets that could start wars. Grace looked up at him, green eyes sharp. This clause about confidentiality, it says I can't reveal anything I learn about vampire society, politics, or individuals under penalty of death. Is that standard? It is. Our existence is predicated on secrecy. Humans know we exist, but they don't know our numbers, our politics, our weaknesses. That knowledge in the wrong hands would be catastrophic, and you trust me with it? I'm choosing to trust you with it. There's a difference. He leaned back in his chair. If at any point you feel unable to maintain that trust, you tell me immediately. Understood? Understood. She returned her attention to the contract, reading through the remaining clauses. When she reached the end, she picked up the pen he'd provided and signed with a flourish. There. Officially employed by the Vampire King. Officially employed by Beaumont Estate, he corrected. My title is relevant in the courts, not in my home. Should I not call you my lord like Katerina does? Katerina is 700 years old and set in her ways. You may call me Vladric. Grace smiled. All right then, Vladric, what's first on the agenda? What followed were several weeks of adjustment that tested both Grace's adaptability and Vladric's patience. She threw herself into learning the household's operations with a determination that impressed even Katerina. She memorized the names and preferences of every vampire who regularly visited the estate. She learned which wines went with which occasions, how to arrange seating for diplomatic dinners, when to intervene in staff disputes and when to let them resolve themselves. She also asked questions. Endless, curious, sometimes dangerously perceptive questions. Why do vampires keep nocturnal hours if some of you are old enough to tolerate sunlight? She asked one evening while helping Vladric sort through invitations in his study. Tradition, he replied. And solidarity. The youngest among us burn in sunlight. We all keep the same hours out of respect. Do you burn in sunlight? No, not for the last 5 centuries. Have you tested it recently? He looked up from the letter he was reading, one eyebrow raised. Are you suggesting I might be wrong about my own capabilities? I'm suggesting that if you haven't tested it in 5 centuries, you might be operating on outdated information. She grinned at his expression. Just a thought. Another time she found him in the vineyard at dusk, walking among the vines as he often did. Do you actually make wine from these grapes? She asked, falling into step beside him. We do. The vintage is sold under a label that has won several international awards. But you can't drink it. I can drink it. I simply derive no sustenance from it. He ran his fingers along a vine heavy with fruit. But I can still appreciate the craft, the complexity, the way time and care transform something simple into something extraordinary. Grace was quiet for a moment, then said softly, like people. He glanced at her. What? Like people? Time and care transforming something simple into something extraordinary. Vladric stopped walking, turning to face her fully. They were standing in the same spot where he'd found her weeping weeks ago, though she looked nothing like that broken girl now. She'd filled out slightly from regular meals, her skin had regained its healthy color, and her eyes held a brightness that had been absent that first night. You've transformed, he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. I had help. She met his gaze steadily. I had someone sit in the dirt with me and then offer me a chance to rebuild. That's not nothing. It was practical. It was kind. You can call it practical all you want, but I know the difference. She reached out, her warm fingers brushing against his cold hand. Thank you. I don't think I ever said it properly. Thank you for saving me. The touch sent electricity through him, sharp and unexpected. Vladric found himself unable to move, unable to speak, caught in the intensity of her gratitude and something else, something deeper that he didn't want to name. You're welcome, he managed finally, his voice rougher than usual. Grace smiled, squeezed his hand once, and then continued down the path, leaving him standing among the vines with his thoughts in turmoil. That night Mikhail found him brooding in the study, staring into the fire with a glass of untouched wine in his hand. You're in love with her, Mikhail said without preamble. Don't be absurd. You've been in love with her since you sat in the dirt with her crying. You just didn't recognize it because you're emotionally stunted from 7 centuries of political maneuvering. Vladric shot him a dark look. I am not emotionally stunted. You once told me that emotions were weaknesses to be exploited in others and suppressed in yourself. That was 200 years ago. Has your position changed? Vladric was silent, which was answer enough. Mikhail sighed and settled into the chair Grace had occupied earlier. She's human, Vladric. Fragile. Mortal. Even if you do love her, what future could you possibly have? I don't love her. Fine, let's pretend you don't. That still doesn't change the fact that you watch her like she's the most fascinating creature you've ever encountered. You smile when she's in the room, actually smile, not that political grimace you usually employ. You've started taking walks in the vineyard at dusk because you know she'll find you there. You're courting her without even realizing it. I'm not courting her. She's my employee. She's a woman you found broken and chose to heal. She's a human living in a vampire's world who somehow makes you remember what it was like to be alive. She's enough. Vladric set down his glass with more force than necessary. Even if what you're saying were true, even if I did have feelings for her, it would be unconscionable to act on them. She's under my protection. She depends on me for her livelihood. The power imbalance alone makes any relationship impossible. So you're going to suffer in noble silence? I'm going to behave like a king instead of a lovesick fool. Mikhail stood, shaking his head. 700 years old and still an idiot about matters of the heart. For what it's worth, I've seen the way she looks at you too. Like you hung the moon just for her. After he left, Vladric sat alone with his thoughts in the dying fire, trying to convince himself that Mikhail was wrong. That what he felt for Grace was merely curiosity, or protective instinct, or anything other than the terrifying vulnerability of love. He was still trying to convince himself 2 weeks later when everything fell apart. It started with a letter from the Vienna court, delivered by a vampire courier who looked like he'd ridden hard through the night. Vladric broke the seal, read the contents, and felt something cold and furious settle in his chest. Katerina, he called, his voice sharp enough to bring her running from the next room. Gather the household, emergency council now. Within minutes his study was filled with the 5 vampires who formed his inner circle. Katerina, Mikhail, and 3 others, Soren, a warrior who'd fought beside him in the Blood Wars, Lyra, his intelligence master, and Dominic, his legal counsel. Grace appeared in the doorway, uncertain. Should I leave? She asked. Stay, Vladric said. This concerns you as well. He held up the letter. Lord Casimir of the Vienna court has filed a formal challenge to my sovereignty. He claims I've grown weak, that I've allowed human sympathies to compromise my judgment. He cites my employment of Grace as evidence of my unfitness to rule. That's ridiculous, Grace said immediately. I'm a household manager. How does that compromise anything? In vampire politics, perception is everything. Lyra's voice was cold and clinical. Casimir has been looking for an excuse to challenge Vladric for decades. He's seized on your presence here as proof that our king has gone soft, so we eliminate him, Soren said bluntly. You've killed challengers before. This is different. Casimir has the backing of 3 other courts. If I simply kill him, it could trigger a civil war. Vladric set down the letter, his mind already working through the politics. He's demanded a formal audience at the Vienna gathering next month. He'll present his challenge publicly, forcing me to respond. What are the options? Dominic asked. I can accept the challenge and face him in single combat, which is traditional but risky. He's brought in a champion from the Moscow court who's supposed to be exceptional. I can negotiate, which makes me look weak, or I can refuse, which effectively cedes the Vienna court to him and sets a precedent that any vampire who disapproves of my choices can challenge me without consequence. Grace had gone very pale. This is because of me. This is because Casimir is ambitious and saw an opportunity. Vladric corrected sharply. Don't flatter yourself into thinking you're that important to vampire politics. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he saw her flinch. Before he could apologize, she straightened her shoulders and said, Then I'll leave. I'll resign my position, leave the estate, make it clear I have no connection to you. Problem solved. No, Vladric, if my being here is going to start a war, I said no. He stood, planting his hands on the desk. I will not be dictated to by Casimir or anyone else. I will not cast out a member of my household because some upstart thinks he can leverage her into a power play, and I will certainly not make decisions based on fear. Then what will you do? Mikhail asked quietly. Vladric was silent for a long moment, thinking. Finally he said, I'll go to Vienna. I'll face Casimir publicly, but I'll do it on my terms. He turned to Grace, and you'll come with me. What? She looked startled. Why? Because running or hiding makes you look like a weakness to be ashamed of. But bringing you openly, showing the entire vampire court that I stand by my choices, and the people under my protection, that's strength. That's a king who doesn't flinch. You're using her as a political statement, Katerina said, disapproval in her voice. I'm using the situation as a political statement. There's a difference. He met Grace's eyes. But I won't do it without your consent. This will put you in danger. The Vienna court is not like this estate. There will be vampires there who see you as prey, as an oddity, as a target. You'll need to be constantly vigilant. I can protect you, but only if you're willing to trust me completely. Grace didn't hesitate. I trust you. Don't answer so quickly. Think about what I'm asking. You'll be surrounded by hundreds of vampires, all of them more powerful than you, some of them hostile. You'll be paraded in front of the courts as evidence of my choices. It won't be safe, and it won't be comfortable. When has my life ever been safe or comfortable? She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Besides, you sat in the dirt with me. The least I can do is stand beside you in Vienna. Something in Vladric's chest loosened at those words, even as his mind catalogued all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Very well, Katerina, arrange travel. We leave in 2 weeks. Soren, I want a security detail. Lyra, intelligence on every vampire who'll be at the gathering. Dominic, brief me on the formal challenge protocols. We're not going to Vienna to fight. We're going to win. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Grace trained with Soren, learning basic self-defense and what to do if attacked by a vampire. She studied vampire politics with Dominic, memorizing the names and allegiances of every major court. She worked with Katerina on the etiquette and protocols that would be expected of her. And in the quiet moments, when the estate settled into its nocturnal rhythms, she found Vladric in the vineyard. Can't sleep? He asked one night, not looking up from the vine he was inspecting. Too much in my head. She joined him on the path, wrapping her sweater tighter against the chill. Are you worried about Vienna? I'm cautious. There's a difference. Vlad, you don't have to pretend with me. I've seen you when you're genuinely calm, and this isn't it. He looked at her then, surprised by the nickname and the perception. When did you become so observant? I've always been observant. You've just started letting me see you clearly. She touched his arm gently. What are you really worried about? For a long moment he considered deflecting, maintaining the mask he showed the world. Then he found himself saying, that I won't be fast enough, that something will happen to you and I'll fail to protect you. That bringing you to Vienna is the worst decision I've ever made. And I'm doing it anyway because the alternative, sending you away, is unthinkable. Grace was quiet, processing this admission. When she spoke, her voice was soft. You care about me. Of course I care about you. You're under my protection. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Vladric turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight she looked ethereal and impossibly fragile. Grace, you don't have to say it, she interrupted. I know there are rules, boundaries, complications. I know I'm human and you're a vampire king, and there's about 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But I need you to know that I care about you too, more than I should, more than is probably wise. And whatever happens in Vienna, I'm glad I met you. I'm glad you sat in the dirt with me that night. I should never have gotten involved, Vladric said, but even as he spoke the words he was moving closer to her, drawn by something he couldn't name and couldn't resist. You deserve someone who can give you a normal life. Someone who isn't 700 years old and embroiled in immortal politics. Someone who isn't you? Grace reached up, her warm hand cupping his cold cheek. Maybe I don't want normal. Maybe I want this, whatever this is. It's impossible. That's not an answer. Grace, her name came out rough, almost broken. If I allow myself to want you, if I allow myself to love you, I make you a target. Every enemy I have will see you as a weapon to use against me. Every vampire who challenges my rule will see you as proof of my weakness. I'll put you in danger for the rest of your life, however long that is. And humans are so fragile, so temporary. She kissed him, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his, cutting off the flow of words. For a heartbeat, Vladric froze, shocked into stillness. Then something in him shattered and he was pulling her close, kissing her back with 7 centuries of repressed longing. Her warmth seeped into his cold skin, her heartbeat thundered against his chest. Her humanity was intoxicating in a way that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with life itself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace was breathing hard. Vladric didn't technically need to breathe, he rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he whispered. Probably the worst, she agreed, smiling. Are we doing it anyway? It appears we are. He pulled back slightly to look at her properly. But Grace, you need to understand what this means. If we do this, if we acknowledge this thing between us, I will protect you with everything I have. I will move earth and heaven to keep you safe. But I can't promise you'll be safe. I can't promise we'll have a happy ending. I can't even promise you'll survive what's coming in Vienna. Then we'll just have to make sure we do. Grace said with a confidence that made him want to laugh and rage at the same time. Together, he echoed, sealing it with another kiss that felt like a vow. They kept their relationship quiet over the next week and a half, not out of shame, but out of strategy. The fewer people who knew before Vienna, the less ammunition Casimir would have, but Mikhail knew, of course. He cornered Vladric 3 days before they were set to leave. You told her, he said. I didn't have to. She knew, and we're together, in whatever capacity that means for a vampire and a human. Mikhail studied him for a long moment, then clapped him on the shoulder. Good. You've been miserable for weeks. At least now you're miserable and happy, which is an improvement. Thank you for that ringing endorsement of my relationship. Just don't get her killed in Vienna. I've grown fond of her. She makes you almost tolerable. The journey to Vienna was made by private plane and then motorcade, traveling only at night and with enough security to guard a head of state, which, in vampire terms, Vladric essentially was. Grace sat beside him in the car, her hand finding his in the darkness. Tell me about Vienna, she said. The city or the court? Both, so he did. He told her about Vienna as it had been when he'd first visited in 1683, about the Ottoman siege and the way the city had rebuilt itself into something magnificent. He told her about the vampire court that had emerged in the centuries since, housed in a massive underground complex beneath the old city that was part palace, part fortress, part museum of immortal history. And Casimir? She asked. He's 300 years old, ambitious and politically savvy. He nearly challenged me once before, 50 years ago, but backed down when he realized he didn't have enough support. He's been building alliances ever since. Can you beat him? In a fair fight? Yes. But Casimir doesn't fight fair. He'll have contingencies, backup plans, traps. I'll have to be very, very careful. They arrived at the Vienna court just after midnight. The entrance was disguised as a historic building, but beneath it the complex sprawled across several city blocks. Vampires in formal attire filled the halls, their conversations falling silent as Vladric passed with Grace at his side. He felt every eye on them, assessing, judging, calculating. Grace held her head high, her hands still in his, and he had never been more proud of anyone in his 7 centuries of existence. Their quarters were in the royal wing, a suite of rooms decorated in Baroque opulence. The moment the doors closed behind them, Grace let out a shaky breath. That was intense. That was the easy part. Vladric moved through the rooms, checking for listening devices or surveillance with practiced efficiency. The formal gathering is tomorrow night. That's when Casimir will make his move. What do I need to do? Stay close to me. Don't engage with anyone unless I'm present. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. He finished his inspection and came back to where she stood. And most importantly, remember that whatever happens, whatever they say or do, you are not the problem. You are not the weakness. You are the choice I made, and I stand by it. Grace reached up to cup his face, her green eyes fierce. We're going to win this. You're going to face down Casimir and make him regret ever challenging you. And I'm going to stand there and watch you do it with a smile on my face. Such faith in a vampire king. Not in a vampire king, she corrected. In you, just you. The next night, Vladric dressed for war. Not literal war, the formal gathering required this formal attire, black and silver with the insignia of his court embroidered in thread that had been spun from actual precious metals. But it was war nonetheless, political and deadly. Grace wore a gown that Katerina had chosen for her. Deep green silk that brought out her eyes and made her look regal despite her humanity. Vladric had given her a necklace, an emerald on a platinum chain that had belonged to a duchess in the 1500s, and told her it was for protection. What he didn't tell her was that it was also a statement the duchess had been under his protection when she'd worn it, and no vampire had dared touch her. They entered the great hall together, and a hush fell over the assembled vampires. Hundreds of them, representing courts from across Europe and beyond, all turned to stare. Vladric felt Grace's pulse quicken, but her steps never faltered. She walked beside him like she belonged there, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Casimir waited on the dais at the far end of the hall, surrounded by his supporters. He was handsome in the way many vampires were, with white blonde hair and pale skin and eyes like chips of ice. He smiled when he saw Vladric approach, and it was the smile of a predator who thought he'd already won. "Lord Vladric," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "How generous of you to grace us with your presence. And you've brought your pet human. How quaint." "I've brought a member of my household," Vladric corrected, his voice cold and precise. "Show some respect, Casimir. Your manners seem to have deteriorated along with your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly sound. It's yours I question." Casimir descended from the dais, moving with predatory grace. "You who have ruled for centuries with wisdom and strength now cling to a fragile human girl like she's some kind of treasure. You elevate her above your own kind. You allow sentiment to cloud your political acumen. You've made yourself vulnerable, Vladric, and in doing so you've made all of us vulnerable." "I've made a choice," Vladric replied, "as is my right as a sovereign king. What I do in my own court, with my own household, is no concern of yours. It becomes my concern when it threatens the stability of vampire society. We survive by being strong, by being united, by putting our kind above all else. You've forgotten that. You've forgotten what it means to be vampire." "No," Vladric said quietly, and something in his tone made the entire hall go silent. "I've remembered what it means to be alive." He turned to address the assembled vampires, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "For 700 years I have led the European courts. I have negotiated peace, waged war, built alliances, and destroyed enemies. I have been exactly what vampire society needed me to be: strong, ruthless, uncompromising. And in all that time, do you know what I forgot? I forgot why we do any of this. I forgot that power without purpose is meaningless. That immortality without connection is just an extended death." He glanced at Grace, who stood straight and proud beside him. "Grace Orwell is human. She is fragile and mortal and temporary. She is also brave, compassionate, and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. She reminds me that there are things worth protecting beyond political advantage, that there are people worth sitting in the dirt for. That choosing to care about someone isn't weakness, it's the only thing that makes this endless existence bearable." "Beautiful sentiment," Casimir sneered. "But sentiment doesn't win wars. Sentiment doesn't protect our secrets. Sentiment doesn't keep humans from hunting us down and destroying us. You've grown soft, Vladric, and a soft king is a danger to us all. Then challenge me properly." Vladric's voice turned sharp as a blade. "By the old laws, single combat witnessed by the assembled courts. If you truly believe I'm unfit to rule, prove it." The hall erupted in murmurs. Casimir's smile widened. "I accept, but let's make it interesting. If I win, I take your throne and all your holdings, and the girl becomes property of the Vienna court." Grace stiffened beside him, and Vladric felt fury course through him like fire. "Grace is not property. She's not a bargaining chip. She's a person, and she's under my protection." "Then protect her," Casimir said smoothly. "Win, and I'll withdraw my challenge and acknowledge your sovereignty. Lose, and she learns what it truly means to be vulnerable among vampires." Vladric wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Casimir exactly where he could shove his challenge. But to refuse now would be to show fear, and fear would destroy his authority faster than any lost combat. He felt Grace's hand slip into his, felt her squeeze gently, and found his resolve. "I accept your terms," he said. "When and where now? Here, let the courts witness." The vampires in the hall pulled back, forming a massive circle. Vladric turned to Grace, cupping her face in his hands. "Stay with Mikhail and Katerina, don't leave their sight." "Be careful," she whispered. "I didn't survive 7 centuries by being reckless." He kissed her, quick and fierce, then released her into Mikhail's custody. The circle cleared, leaving Vladric and Casimir facing each other across bare marble. They bowed, a formality that felt absurd given the circumstances, and then Casimir attacked. He was faster than Vladric had anticipated. The fight that followed was brutal and elegant in equal measure, a dance of supernatural speed and strength that would have been invisible to human eyes. Casimir fought with a saber, a weapon he'd mastered over his 3 centuries. Vladric fought unarmed, using his greater age and experience to anticipate encounter. They moved through the circle in a blur of motion, exchanging blows that would have killed a human instantly. Casimir drew first blood, his saber opening a gash across Vladric's shoulder. The wound healed almost immediately, vampire regeneration knitting flesh back together, but the message was clear: Casimir was better than expected. Vladric adjusted his strategy, moving from defensive to offensive. He caught Casimir's next strike, twisted the saber from his grip, and drove his fist into the younger vampire's chest hard enough to crack ribs. Casimir stumbled back and Vladric pressed the advantage, but Casimir had been telling the truth about having contingencies. As Vladric moved in to finish the fight, 3 vampires broke from the crowd, Casimir's supporters, violating every protocol of single combat. They moved toward Grace and Vladric's blood went cold. He spun, abandoning his attack on Casimir to intercept the vampires heading for Grace. He reached the first one in a fraction of a second, snapping its neck with brutal efficiency. The second he caught mid-lunge, hurling it across the hall with enough force to shatter marble. The third was already on Grace, grabbing her by the throat and lifting her off her feet. Vladric saw red. What happened next would be debated in vampire courts for decades. Vladric moved with a speed and fury that no one in the hall had ever witnessed, crossing the distance to Grace in literally no time at all. He tore the vampire off her with one hand while simultaneously catching her falling body with the other. Then he turned to Casimir, who stood frozen in the center of the circle, and spoke in a voice that resonated with centuries of absolute authority. "You violated single combat. You endangered someone under my protection. You have forfeited not just this challenge but your right to exist in my courts." "You can't," Casimir began. "I am the vampire king of Europe," Vladric interrupted, and power rolled off him in waves that made every vampire in the hall take an involuntary step back. "I have ruled for 7 centuries with wisdom and mercy. I have given second chances to those who deserved them and third chances to those who didn't. But this attacking a human under my protection in front of the assembled courts, this I will not tolerate." He set Grace down gently, making sure she was steady, then advanced on Casimir. The younger vampire tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Vladric caught him by the throat, lifting him the same way Casimir's supporter had lifted Grace. "I could kill you," Vladric said quietly. "By rights, I should. But that would make you a martyr. Instead, I'm stripping you of your title, your lands, and your position in the Vienna court. You will leave Europe tonight and never return. If I see you again, if I even hear your name spoken in my courts, I will end you. Do you understand?" Casimir managed a jerky nod, and Vladric dropped him. The fallen vampire scrambled away, fleeing the hall with what remained of his dignity in tatters. Vladric turned to address the assembled courts, his arm going around Grace's waist to steady her and to make a statement. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who mistakes compassion for weakness. I choose to care about this woman. I choose to protect her. I choose to stand here with her in front of all of you and declare that she matters to me. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger than any of you can imagine, because I'm willing to fight for something beyond power." The hall was silent. Then slowly, Mikhail began to clap. Katerina joined him, then Soren, then more vampires throughout the crowd, until the entire hall was filled with applause. Casimir's challenge had failed. Vladric's authority was stronger than ever, and Grace was safe. They left Vienna the next night, declining the offers to stay for the remainder of the gathering. Grace needed time to recover from the trauma of nearly being killed, and Vladric needed distance from the politics before he did something rash like declare war on everyone who'd supported Casimir. The journey home was quiet. Grace slept for most of it, curled against Vladric's side in the car, her head on his shoulder. He held her carefully, acutely aware of how close he'd come to losing her. When they finally reached Beaumont Estate, she stirred, blinking up at him. "We're home." "We are. You were incredible in Vienna. The way you fought, the way you spoke, the way you just commanded the room. I've never seen anything like it." "I was terrified," Vladric admitted. "When I saw that vampire grab you, when I thought for even a second that I might lose you, I was more frightened than I've been in 7 centuries. Grace sat up, turning to face him properly. "But you didn't lose me. You saved me. Again. I shouldn't have put you in that position to begin with." "Vladric, listen to me." She took his hands in hers, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I chose to go to Vienna. I chose to stand beside you. I chose this, all of it, knowing the risks. You're not responsible for every danger I face. You're responsible for being there when I need you. And you've never failed at that. Not once." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in her warmth and her life. "I love you," he said, the words feeling strange and new and terrifying on his tongue. "I've loved you since you sat weeping in my vineyard and talked about endings and transformations. I love your strength, your courage, your refusal to give up even when everything is falling apart. I love you, Grace Orwell. And it's the most foolish and wonderful thing I've done in over 700 years. Grace was crying, but these were different tears than the ones he'd first witnessed. These were tears of joy, of relief, of love returned. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the back of the car while Mikhail pretended not to notice and Katerina smiled from the front seat. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and joy. Grace continued her work managing the household, but now she did it as Vladric's acknowledged partner, not just his employee. The vampire staff adapted quickly, treating her with the deference due to someone under the king's personal protection and more, someone who held his heart. Vladric found himself experiencing things he'd thought lost to time. Simple pleasures like walking through the vineyard at dusk with Grace's hand in his, comfortable silences as they worked in his study, her handling correspondence while he read political reports. Laughter, genuine and unguarded, when she convinced him to watch human movies and explain pop culture references he had no context for. But there were complications too. Grace was mortal, aging with every passing day while he remained frozen in time. They didn't discuss it at first, both aware of the elephant in the room but unwilling to shatter their happiness by acknowledging it, until one evening 6 months after Vienna, when Grace brought it up directly. They were in the vineyard again, their place, watching the sun set. Grace had learned that the transition from day to night was the one time Vladric could be outside while the sun was technically still up. Those few minutes of dusk when the light was gentle enough not to burn even young vampires. "I've been thinking about the future," Grace said quietly. "Have you?" "I'm going to get old, Vladric. In 10 years I'll look 40, in 20 I'll look 50. In 40 or 50 years, if I'm lucky, I'll die of old age, and you'll still look exactly like this. I'm aware, doesn't that bother you?" He turned to face her, taking in every detail of her beloved face. "Every day," he admitted. "I think about it every single day. I think about how temporary this is, how brief, how I'm going to lose you far too soon. And then I think about how much worse it would be never to have had this at all, never to have sat in the dirt with you, never to have loved you, never to have known what it felt like to be alive again." "There's another option," Grace said carefully. "You could turn me." Vladric went very still. "No, why not? We'd have eternity together. I'd never grow old, never leave you." "Grace." He caught her hands, gripping them tightly. "Do you understand what you're asking? Becoming a vampire isn't like in stories. It's not romantic. It's dying. Really truly dying, and then coming back is something different. Something that needs blood to survive. Something that will never see sunlight again, never taste human food, never have children, never grow or change or experience any of the things that make human life precious. But I'd have you. You have me now. You'll have me for as long as you live, however long that is. I don't need you to be immortal to love you, Grace. I just need you to be you. What if I want it anyway? What if I want centuries with you instead of just decades?" Vladric released her hands, turning away to stare out at the vines. "Ask me again in 5 years. If you still want it then, if you've really thought about everything you'd be giving up, we'll discuss it. But Grace, I won't turn you just because you're afraid of growing old. I won't make you into something you're not just to ease my own fear of losing you. And if in 5 years I still want it, then we'll talk about it. Really talk about it, with all the implications laid out." He looked back at her, his expression pained. "I love you enough to give you eternity if that's what you truly want. But I also love you enough to make sure you understand what you're asking for." Grace nodded slowly, accepting this. 5 years then, and in the meantime? "In the meantime we live, we love, we make every day count." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "We make this beautiful however long it lasts." And they did. The years that followed were the happiest Vladric had known in his long existence. He took Grace to Venice and showed her the palazzo where he'd lived in the 1600s. He taught her to appreciate wine not just as a beverage but as art, as history, as transformation. He introduced her to vampires from courts around the world, and she charmed them all with her intelligence, her warmth, her humanity. Grace, for her part, discovered a talent for vampire politics. She had a gift for seeing through deception, for finding compromises that satisfied everyone, for turning potential conflicts into diplomatic triumphs. Vladric found himself consulting her on decisions he would have once made alone, valuing her perspective and her insight. They were partners in every sense of the word. 3 years after Vienna, Grace had an idea. She came to Vladric's study one evening with a proposal that made him blink in surprise. "I want to establish a program," she said, spreading papers across his desk. "A sort of halfway house for humans who need help. People like I was, who've lost everything and just need a chance to rebuild. We could use the old caretaker's cottage on the edge of the estate, provide temporary housing, help with job searching, resources for getting back on their feet. You want to turn my estate into a charity? I want to help people the way you helped me." She met his eyes steadily. "You saved my life, Vladric. Let me use that to save others." He considered it, turning the idea over in his mind. It was risky. More humans on the property meant more potential for exposure, more complications, but it was also quintessentially Grace, this desire to transform her own pain into something that helped others. "All right," he said finally, "but with conditions. Security will be paramount. Anyone who stays in the program will need to sign confidentiality agreements. And you'll have final say on who gets accepted. I trust your judgment on humans far more than I trust anyone else's." Grace's face lit up with joy and she kissed him hard enough to make him laugh. "Thank you. You won't regret this." He didn't. Over the next 2 years, Grace's program helped dozens of people. She had a gift for seeing who genuinely needed help versus who might take advantage, and the success stories piled up. People who'd been homeless found jobs and housing. People who'd lost hope found community and purpose, and all of them left with a story about the mysterious estate on the hill where a kind woman had given them a second chance. None of them knew about the vampires, of course. Grace was scrupulous about keeping that secret. But several of them met Vladric in passing and came away with the impression of a stern but fair benefactor who clearly adored the woman running the program. 5 years to the day after their conversation in the vineyard, Grace came to Vladric as he was reviewing the accounts in his study. "It's been 5 years," she said without preamble. He looked up, understanding immediately. "It has. I still want it. I've thought about it every day for 5 years, and I still want to spend eternity with you. I want to be turned." Vladric set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Have you thought about what you'll be giving up? Really thought about it?" "I've thought about little else," Grace said, settling into the chair across from him. "I'll never see another sunrise. I'll never taste chocolate or coffee or bread. I'll never have children, never grow old with friends who stay human, never experience the natural cycle of life and death. I've made lists, Vladric. Exhaustive lists of everything I'll lose, and yet you still want this." "Yes, because none of those things matter as much as you do, as we do." She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "I've had 5 years of waking up beside you, of running this household with you, of being your partner in every way that matters, and I want 500 more, 5,000 more. However long forever is, I want to spend it with you." Vladric was quiet for a long moment, emotions warring in his chest. Fear that he was making the wrong choice, that he was taking something beautiful and human and transforming it into something else. Hope that perhaps they really could have eternity together. Love, overwhelming and all-consuming, for this woman who'd chosen him not once but over and over again. "If we do this," he said finally, "there's no going back. Once you're turned, that's it. You'll be vampire forever. If you change your mind in 100 years, it won't matter. You'll be bound to this existence, I understand. And the turning itself is not pleasant. It's painful. You'll die, Grace. Your heart will stop, your breathing will cease, and you'll be dead for several hours while the vampire blood works through your system. When you wake up, you'll be hungry in a way you've never experienced. You'll want blood, and the wanting will be almost impossible to resist. Will you be there? When I wake up, I won't leave your side for a second." Grace stood, walking around the desk to where he sat. She climbed into his lap, straddling him, framing his face with her hands. "Then I'm ready. Turn me, Vladric. Make me yours forever." He kissed her, slow and deep, memorizing the taste of her humanity one last time. When he pulled back, his eyes were serious. "Tomorrow night, I'll need to prepare. Make sure we have adequate blood supply for your first feeding. Ensure we won't be disturbed. Use today to say goodbye to the sun. Tomorrow at dusk, if you still want this, we'll do it." "I'll still want it," Grace said with absolute certainty. She spent the next day outside, soaking in sunlight for the last time. She ate her favorite foods, savoring each bite. She called the handful of human friends she still maintained contact with, not saying goodbye but making sure their last conversations were good ones. She walked through the vineyard where this had all begun, running her fingers along the vines that had understood endings and transformations. When dusk fell, she found Vladric in his chambers. He'd prepared everything meticulously. The bed was fresh, the curtains drawn, several bags of blood stood ready in a medical cooler. Mikhail and Katerina waited outside the door, ready to help if needed. "Last chance to change your mind," Vladric said as Grace entered. "Not changing my mind." She came to him, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love you. Make me like you." He guided her to the bed, settling her against the pillows. "The bite will hurt at first, but then endorphins will kick in. It'll feel good, almost euphoric. Don't fight it. Let yourself drift. The actual death is painless. You'll just slip away. And when I wake up, I'll be right here. I promise." Grace nodded, tilting her head to expose her throat. Vladric bent over her, pressing a kiss to the pulse point in her neck, feeling her heartbeat against his lips. Then gently he bit down. Grace gasped at the initial pain, her hands clutching at his shoulders. But within seconds the pain transformed into pleasure, her body relaxing as the vampire venom flooded her system. Vladric drank carefully, precisely, taking enough to trigger the transformation but not so much that he'd lose control. When he'd taken the right amount, he bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded softly. Grace drank, pulling his blood into her body. The taste was strange, coppery and cold and somehow electric. She drank until Vladric pulled away, then collapsed back against the pillows, her vision already darkening. "Vladric," she whispered. "I'm here, I've got you, just let go." Grace's eyes fluttered closed. Her heartbeat slowed, stuttered, stopped. Her breathing ceased. For several long minutes she was completely, utterly dead. Vladric held her corpse, feeling like his own heart might break despite its long silence. Had he done the right thing? Had she really understood what she was asking? What if she woke up and hated him for this? But there was no going back now. All he could do was wait. 6 hours later, Grace's eyes snapped open, and they were red as blood. She sat up with a gasp, her hand going to her throat. Her senses were overwhelmed. She could hear everything, see everything, smell everything. The night outside the window was bright as day to her new eyes. She could hear Mikhail and Katerina's conversation through the closed door. She could smell blood, and the smell made her stomach clench with hunger. "Vladric," she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, clearer somehow. "I'm here." He was beside her instantly, taking her hands. "How do you feel?" "Hungry, so hungry." Her eyes fixed on the pulse point in his throat, tracking the movement of blood beneath his skin even though his heart didn't beat. "I can hear your blood moving. I can smell it, I know. But you need to feed on bagged blood first, not directly from a source. It's easier to control." He reached for the cooler, pulling out a bag. "Here, drink this." Grace took the bag with shaking hands and bit into it without ceremony. The blood flooded her mouth, and it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She drank deeply, draining the entire bag in seconds. "More," she gasped. Vladric handed her another bag and another, watching carefully to make sure she didn't lose control. By the fourth bag, the desperate hunger eased to something manageable. Grace set down the empty bag and looked at her hands, flexing her fingers, marveling at the strength she could feel thrumming through her. "I'm a vampire," she said, wonder in her voice. "You are. I'm really a vampire." She looked up at him, and her red eyes were bright with joy and amazement. "Vladric, I can feel everything. The world is so vivid, so alive. How did I not know how dull human senses were?" He smiled, relief washing through him. "You're handling this remarkably well. Most new vampires spend their first night completely overwhelmed. I am overwhelmed, but in a good way." Grace launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me forever with you." They kissed, and it was different now. She was strong enough not to break, fast enough to keep up with him, immortal enough that he didn't have to fear losing her to time. It was perfect. The months that followed were an adjustment period as Grace learned to control her new vampire nature. She had to resign from running the charity program. New vampires couldn't be around humans without strict supervision until they'd mastered their bloodlust. Instead, she threw herself into vampire politics, using her analytical mind and diplomatic skills to help Vladric navigate the complex relationships between courts. She was good at it. Better than good, she was exceptional. Within a year, she'd brokered 3 major treaties and prevented 2 potential wars. The vampire courts began referring to her as the diplomat queen, Vladric's partner in ruling as well as in love. 2 years after her turning, they formalized their relationship in a vampire ceremony that dated back millennia. It wasn't marriage exactly. Vampires didn't marry in the human sense, but it was a binding, a declaration before all the courts that they were partners, equals, bound together for eternity. The ceremony was held at Beaumont Estate, in the vineyard where they'd first met. Hundreds of vampires attended, representing courts from around the world. Grace wore a gown of deep green silk, the color of her former human eyes, and Vladric wore traditional ceremonial attire that had been in his family for 8 centuries. They stood among the vines at dusk, that liminal time between day and night, and spoke vows that neither of them had ever expected to say. "I bind myself to you," Vladric said, his voice carrying through the vineyard, "for as long as we both shall exist. Your battles are my battles, your joys are my joys, your eternity is my eternity." "I bind myself to you," Grace echoed, her red eyes bright with love. "For as long as we both shall exist. I choose you, today and every day. I choose this life, this love, this forever." They sealed the binding with blood, each drinking from the other, and the assembled vampires erupted in applause. The celebration lasted 3 days, a festival of immortal joy and vampire tradition. But the moment Grace treasured most came on the 4th night, when the guests had departed and she and Vladric found themselves alone in the vineyard once more. "Do you regret it?" Vladric asked, pulling her close. "Giving up humanity, giving up the sun, giving up everything you were." Grace looked up at the stars, impossibly bright to her vampire eyes, then back at the male she loved. "Not for a second. You saved me twice, Vladric. Once when you found me weeping in this vineyard, and once when you made me your equal for eternity. How could I regret that?" "I thought I'd forgotten how to be alive," Vladric admitted. 700 years of existing, of ruling, of enduring. And then you appeared, crying among my vines, and suddenly I remembered. You made me remember. Then we saved each other, Grace said softly. They stood there in the vineyard for a long time, two immortals who'd found in each other something worth living for. The vines around them grew heavy with grapes that would become wine, transformation, and art and time made manifest. In the distance, Beaumont Manor glowed with warm light, their home and their kingdom. Grace had lost everything once, sitting in the dirt and weeping for a life that had fallen apart. But she'd found something infinitely better in the vampire who'd sat beside her instead of walking away. She'd found love, partnership, purpose, and forever. And Vladric, the ancient king who'd thought himself beyond surprise or joy or love, had found his match in a grieving girl who'd taught him that endings were just another kind of beginning. They had eternity ahead of them now, an endless expanse of nights and moments in shared existence. There would be challenges. Certainly vampire politics never slept, and the world would continue to change around them. But they would face it all together, the king and his diplomat queen, bound by blood and choice and a love that had begun with tears and dirt and kindness. In the vineyard where dying grapes became wine, where endings became transformations, where a weeping girl had met a vampire king at dusk, two immortals stood together and looked toward forever. And it was beautiful.